Nobody is going to warn you about what I'm about to tell you. And I say that not to be dramatic. I say it because in 12 years of studying human behavior and attachment psychology, I have watched this specific pattern destroy more emotionally intelligent people than almost anything else I have encountered. Not because they were weak, not because they made obvious mistakes, but because they were operating with incomplete information about how the human nervous system actually processes love. So before you do anything else right now, I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I am about to break down is going to reframe something you have been trying to understand, maybe for months, maybe for years, in a way that finally makes it make sense. Here is what nobody tells you about an avoidant. They do not run from people they do not care about. They run from people they care about so much it triggers every threat response in their nervous system simultaneously. And if that sentence just hit something in your chest, keep watching, because I'm going to show you the exact psychological mechanism behind that, and more importantly, I'm going to show you what it means for you right now. Let me start with a scene. Imagine someone sitting alone in their apartment at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. No particular reason, no crisis, just a quiet night. They are scrolling, half watching something, existing in the comfortable numbness that has become their default state. And then without warning, without invitation, a memory surfaces. Not a dramatic memory, not a milestone moment, a small one. The way someone laughed at something they said. The way that same person looked at them once, not with desire, not with need, but with something quieter and more unsettling than either of those things. Recognition. Genuine, undefended recognition. And in the span of about 4 seconds, this person sitting alone on a Thursday night feels something move through their chest that they have been successfully avoiding for 8 months. They put their phone down, they sit with it, and for the first time since they ended things, they let themselves ask the question they have been running from. Did I just make the biggest mistake of my life? That person is the avoidant. And that moment, that specific Thursday night reckoning, is what I want to take apart today. Because inside that moment is everything you need to understand about why people who seem emotionally closed destroy themselves over the connections they chose to leave. But first, I need to give you something that most people get completely wrong about avoidant attachment. Because if you go into this with the wrong framework, everything else I tell you will land incorrectly. Avoidant attachment is not coldness. It is not selfishness. It is not an inability to love. It is not even emotional immaturity, though it can look like all of those things from the outside. Avoidant attachment is a learned survival response that was built during a period of life when emotional need was genuinely dangerous. Think about that for a second. Most avoidantly attached adults developed that pattern before they were 10 years old. In homes where emotional expression led to punishment, dismissal, or the withdrawal of love. In environments where needing someone was the thing that got you hurt. In childhoods where the safest version of yourself was the self-sufficient one. The one who did not need anything from anyone. The brain of a child in that environment does not decide to become avoidant, it adapts. It builds a psychological architecture designed to minimize the risk of emotional exposure. Because emotional exposure in that environment meant pain. And the extraordinary thing about the human nervous system is how loyal it is to old maps. 20 years later, 30 years later, that same person is sitting across from someone who is offering them exactly what they always needed: genuine attunement, real emotional safety, a relationship where they do not have to manage their own presentation constantly. And their nervous system is still running the old map. It is still treating love like a threat. There is research from the University of Amsterdam that measured physiological stress responses in avoidantly attached adults during what were described as intimate but emotionally safe conversations. These were not confrontational conversations, not high-pressure situations, just warmth, just closeness, just someone seeing them gently. The stress hormones spiked anyway, not slightly, significantly. Their body classified genuine emotional safety as a physical threat. Now hold that image because I'm going to come back to it. Because here is the part nobody is talking about. The person who activates that threat response most powerfully is not the person who is demanding or chaotic or emotionally overwhelming. It is the empath. And this is where the psychology gets genuinely fascinating. Because an empath is not threatening in any obvious way. They do not push, they do not pressure, they do not demand that you open up or explain yourself or process anything on a timeline. They just show up with an unsettling level of perceptiveness and start responding to the version of you that you have never shown anyone. That is the threat. Because here is what is actually happening neurologically when an empath encounters an avoidant. Empaths, through some combination of genetics and early emotional experience, operate with unusually high sensitivity in the brain systems responsible for reading other people. They pick up signals that most people's nervous systems filter out as background noise. Micro-expressions, tension in the voice, the specific quality of someone's silence, the gap between what someone says and what their face does in the half-second before they say it. The avoidant has spent years keeping their hidden interior invisible to everyone around them. They have become extraordinarily skilled at emotional management and social performance. The curated version of themselves is essentially seamless. And then someone shows up and starts responding to what is behind the curation. Not aggressively, not invasively, just with a quiet accuracy that is more destabilizing than any confrontation could ever be. The empath asks a question that should be generic and somehow lands on something specific and tender. They notice something the avoidant let slip for one unguarded second, and instead of moving past it, they hold space for it. They look at the avoidant in a way that does not feel like observation, it feels like recognition. And something happens inside the avoidant that they are completely unprepared for. Their hidden self feels real. Not acknowledged in theory, not seen from a safe distance, actually tangibly real. Because another human being is responding to it as though it is there, as though it has always been there, as though it is allowed to be there. And for a moment, sometimes a few days, sometimes a few weeks, sometimes months, the avoidant leans toward this. The defenses soften slightly. More gets shared than usual. There are conversations that go deeper than they intended. There are moments of connection so unusual for this person that they do not even have a framework to process what they are experiencing. They are experiencing, some of them for the first time in their adult lives, the possibility that being fully known might not be the most dangerous thing in the world. And then the system kicks back in. Because that possibility is not just hope. For the avoidant, that possibility is catastrophic vulnerability. Because if they allow themselves to be fully known, fully reached, fully real with another person, and that person still leaves, or changes their mind, or uses what they saw against them, the damage would not be the ordinary damage of a failed relationship. It would be the confirmation of the deepest fear they have ever carried. That their real self, the unmanaged, unpolished, emotionally honest self beneath all that competence and self-sufficiency is not actually lovable. So they do not leave because they do not care. They leave because they care so much that the risk has become unbearable. And here is the open loop I want you to carry forward right now, because we are going to come back to it. What happens to those feelings when the avoidant leaves? Where does all of that go? Because emotions are not deleted by distance. They are stored. And stored emotion does not stay stored forever. Keep that. Now I want to talk about what happens to the empath in the middle of all this, because this is a part of the story that gets flattened in most conversations about avoidant attachment. When the avoidant pulls back, the empath does not just feel rejected, they feel confused at a level that is almost dizzying, because their entire perceptual system was telling them that the connection was real. And it was real. Their nervous system was not lying to them. The attunement was genuine. The depth was genuine. The moments where the avoidant's real self came through and the empath met it with warmth and steadiness, those were not imagined. So the confusion is not, did I imagine this? The confusion is, if it was real, why did they leave? And because empaths process at the level of deep emotional cause rather than surface behavior, they do not settle for, they were just not ready, or they are emotionally unavailable. They want to understand the mechanism. They want to understand the why at a level precise enough that the confusion finally resolves. Which is, frankly, exactly why you are watching this video right now. But here is what that search for understanding costs the empath, and I want you to hear this carefully. The more precisely you understand the avoidance psychology, the more compassionate your interpretation of their behavior becomes. And the more compassionate your interpretation becomes, the easier it is to stay in proximity to a dynamic that is quietly costing you. You understand their wound so well that you stop noticing how much the wound is affecting you. There is a concept in psychology called empathic overextension. It describes what happens when your capacity for emotional attunement consistently exceeds your capacity for self-protective discernment. You can feel what someone else is experiencing so accurately that you start treating their emotional reality as more real, more urgent, more important than your own. And empaths in avoidant dynamics are extraordinarily susceptible to this, because the avoidant is genuinely hurting. The distress they are broadcasting, even silently, is real. And the empath's nervous system picks that up and interprets it as, "This person needs me." But here is the reframe that changes everything. Someone needing you is not the same as someone being able to receive you. I want you to say that again quietly to yourself because it is probably the most important distinction in this entire video. Needing and being able to receive are not the same thing. The avoidant needs connection at the exact same frequency that they are constitutionally unable to stay inside it. And no amount of patience, attunement, or emotional generosity from the empath changes that equation. Not because the empath is not enough, but because the variable that needs to change is not on the empath side of the relationship. Now, back to the Thursday night moment. Back to the avoidant sitting alone with that memory surfacing. Because here is what is actually happening in that moment, and this is the part that most people, including most content about this topic, gets wrong. The avoidant is not falling in love with you. They are falling in love with the memory of the version of themselves they were when they were with you. Let that land. Because the empath did something that almost nothing else in that person's life has done. They reflected back a version of the avoidant that was more emotionally alive, more real, more whole, than the version the avoidant normally allows themselves to inhabit. And in the absence of the relationship, in the quiet after the withdrawal, that version of themselves does not disappear. It becomes a ghost. It haunts every new connection that fails to reach the same depth. It makes shallower interactions feel like suffocation. It makes the avoidant's carefully constructed independence start to feel less like freedom and more like a very well-decorated prison. Psychologists studying what they call post-relational processing in avoidantly attached adults have documented something remarkable. The emotional content that gets suppressed during an intimate relationship does not dissolve when the relationship ends. It processes in the aftermath, sometimes weeks later, sometimes months later, sometimes years. What this means practically is that the avoidant who seemed unmoved during the relationship, who appeared calm during the breakup, who moved on apparently smoothly, is not actually processing the relationship while it is happening. They are processing it in the silence after, alone, without witnesses, without the person who created the experience even knowing it is occurring. This is why the avoidant's regret can arrive so much later than anyone expects. They are not slow to feel. They are delayed in processing. Because the nervous system that suppressed emotion during the relationship finally relaxes its guard when the perceived threat of intimacy is no longer present. And what floods in is everything they did not let themselves feel in real time. And I need you to understand what this means for you if you are the empath in this situation. Their eventual grief is real. Their eventual recognition of what they lost is genuine. Their 2 a.m. text, their sideways reach out months later, the way they circle back with something that finally sounds like emotional honesty, none of that is manipulation. It is delayed processing arriving in real time. But, and this is the but that saves lives, their readiness is not determined by the intensity of their feeling. It is determined by whether they have done the actual behavioral work on the attachment patterns that caused them to leave in the first place. Feeling the loss deeply does not make someone ready to receive love differently. Understanding their avoidant patterns intellectually does not make someone capable of staying present when intimacy activates the alarm. Sending the text does not mean they have rebuilt the internal architecture required to show up consistently. The only thing that changes an avoidance pattern is sustained, targeted work on the nervous system response itself. Therapy, structured attachment repair, consistent exposure to emotional intimacy without retreat. Not insight, work. And here's the thing that I want to plant right now because we are going to return to it. You can love someone through their healing. You can support it. You can witness it. But you cannot do it for them. And you cannot afford to put your own life on hold waiting for it to happen on its own. Now I want to speak directly to the empaths for a moment, because everything I have described so far, the avoidance suppression, their delayed grief, their eventual regret, this is not the part of the story that matters most for your life going forward. It is fascinating, it is psychologically accurate, and it is useful context. But it is not the thing that changes your trajectory. Here is what changes your trajectory. You have spent enormous amounts of emotional intelligence, perception, and care trying to understand another person's inner world. You have developed an almost forensic capacity for reading emotional signals that most people miss entirely. You have built a level of empathic attunement that is genuinely rare, and you have been pointing it almost entirely outward. The empath who redirects that same capacity inward becomes a completely different person in relationships. Not less caring, not more guarded, just clearer. Because when you apply to yourself the same level of perceptiveness you have been applying to everyone else, you start noticing things that were previously invisible to you. The moment your nervous system says yes to someone who has historically been unavailable to you, the specific emotional frequency that feels like home because it resembles something unresolved from your own early life. The way your attunement to other people's distress has been functioning as a substitute for attending to your own. Empaths are not attracted to avoidance randomly. There is typically a precise neurological resonance between the two. The empath system learned early that love is something you earn through emotional labor, through being perceptive enough, through making the other person feel safe enough, through managing the emotional temperature of the relationship skillfully enough. And avoidants provide an endless supply of emotional labor opportunities. The dynamic feeds something in the empath's own attachment wound at the exact moment it appears to be healing someone else's. This is not a flaw, it is a pattern, and patterns can be changed, but only once they are seen clearly. The most powerful thing an empath can do is become as curious about their own nervous system as they have been about the avoidance. Why does unavailability feel like depth to you? Why does the person who reaches back consistently and shows up without drama feel less compelling than the one who keeps you slightly uncertain? Why does your empathy extend so naturally towards someone who is struggling to be present and so rarely toward yourself when you are struggling to be received? These are not comfortable questions, but they are the questions that lead somewhere real. Because here is what I have watched happen to empaths who genuinely do this work. They stop attracting the same dynamic. Not because they become less empathic, but because they stop being unconsciously available for relationships that require them to suppress their own needs in order to maintain proximity. They become, to use a precise term, a different frequency. And a different frequency attracts different people. Now let me bring this back to the avoidant, because I said I would close the loop, and I am going to. The avoidant who eventually does their work, who actually engages with the psychological architecture of their own attachment system, who learns to tolerate the alarm instead of evacuating the situation, who builds the capacity to stay present inside emotional intensity rather than escaping it. That avoidant becomes someone genuinely capable of the depth they once ran from. And when a healed avoidant meets a clear empath, two people who have both done the actual interior work on their own attachment systems rather than outsourcing it to each other, the dynamic that results is among the most rare and extraordinary forms of human connection that exists. Not because it is easy, not because there is no friction, but because both people have developed the capacity to feel the alarm and choose to stay anyway. That is not just love, that is earned intimacy. And earned intimacy is structurally different from the intensity of an unhealed dynamic. It is quieter, more sustainable, less charged with the electricity of almost and not quite and maybe if. But it is deeper, and it lasts. Here is what I want to leave you with. If you are an empath who has loved an avoidant, and you are sitting with the particular grief of having been deeply connected to someone who could not stay, I want to offer you something more useful than explanation. The depth you accessed in that relationship was real. The connection you felt was not projection. It was not idealization. Something genuinely rare was reached inside both of you. And that depth, that capacity for real emotional intimacy, that is yours. It did not leave with them. It is not locked inside that specific relationship waiting for them to come back and unlock it. It is a capacity that lives inside you, and it will be available in every relationship you choose to bring your full self into. The avoidant showed you, accidentally and at great cost, exactly how much emotional depth you are capable of accessing. That information belongs to you now. The question is simply, who are you going to offer it to next? Because the right person, the ready person, the person whose nervous system is not running from what your attunement creates, that person is not going to need months of careful reassurance before they let you in. They are going to recognize you immediately. And they are going to stay. If this video hit something specific and real for you, I want to hear about it in the comments. Not just because engagement helps the channel, but because I genuinely read them and I want to know which part of this landed where it needed to. Subscribe if you want the kind of psychology content that makes the confusing things finally make sense. Because the next video I am putting out breaks down the 6 behavioral tells that separate an avoidant who is genuinely healing from one who has simply found more sophisticated ways to keep you at a distance. And if you are currently trying to make that call, you are going to want to see it.